Chapter 21. Monday late morning. Doreen settled down at her laptop to do more research on Josh Hubert's and both Cecily and Celeste Bingham. She didn't know how far along Mac was getting with his particular investigations, but if Doreen could solve something, it just added fuel to her fire to solve something else. She checked her research notes and realized something had to be going on with the sisters. She picked up the phone, and as soon as Nan answered, Doreen asked, "Hey, you know the dead woman I found outside the family planning center?" "Yes." "Celeste," Nan said. "Cecily is the one who runs the center." "Did you ever hear rumors of anything going on with Celeste and Josh? Or maybe Cecily and Josh," she added hesitantly. Nan took a moment to figure out what Doreen was talking about. Nothing at all about Cecily and Josh. As for Celeste and Josh, if you mean they're fighting, that's just the type of relationship they had. Those two have been fighting since forever. About what? Celeste didn't want a family. And her sister, Cecily, was totally on board with her. They were all about women's rights. "I happen to agree with them," Doreen said dryly. "At least to the point that women have the right to a choice. But what's that got to do with this now?" "If the cops ever come here, they should talk to those of us in the know," Nan said. "They'd find out that Josh probably did kill himself. He loved her. He loved her dearly." On that note, she hung up. Doreen sat at the kitchen table and stared at her phone. But love can turn to hate. And to shoot somebody twice usually means there's a lot of anger, up close and personal too. So what would make him turn on her like that? And then she got it. Doreen picked up the phone and called Mac. "Did you ever get the autopsy results on Celeste Bingham, the woman who was murdered?" "No autopsy has been done," he said. "Or will be done, as it's been declared a murder-suicide." "Don't you care about the whys behind a murder?" "In this case, it's a murder-suicide," he repeated. "Really, there's no mystery behind it. I still think the reason why he might have done something like that matters." "A falling out among lovers," he said. "It's very common." "It might be," she said, "but that's why I was asking about an autopsy." "No autopsy." In exasperation, he asked, "Why?" "Have you talked to Cecily?" "No," he said. "She wasn't around at the time." "No, of course not," she said. "You said the center was closed, right?" "Yes." Josh Hubert's was actively working to shut it down. "And that's understandable. I guess one could consider that great passion can turn to great rage. And great rage causes actions that are hard to reverse. So it would make sense why he went home and was unable to live with himself, and he killed himself. But only if you found more bullets. I did hear 4 shots. "Yes," Mac said with patience. "But why are you still questioning the case?" "I think she was pregnant, and she aborted it. Without telling him." There was silence on the phone. And then Mac said, his voice sad and gentle, "Yes, that would probably cause it. But we can't just guess here, you know." "I know," she said in a low voice. "You might ask the coroner if she'd had an abortion recently, or maybe you can ask her sister. She might tell you." "You think she knew about it?" he asked curiously. "Who else would?" she asked. "And it would make sense if he'd been so desperate to have his own child, and then she turned around and aborted it, well? Yes, that could send a man over the edge," he said, "particularly if he really wanted the baby." "Exactly," she said. "So unfortunately, there are no answers on this mystery for me in this case. But I do have a line on another one." And then, laughing, she hung up the phone. When it rang again, she ignored it, snatched her cup of tea, and walked out into the backyard. Tomorrow couldn't come fast enough for her. She would love to solve that missing child case. As far as the dead couple, she worried about Josh's motivation. It was none of her business again, but would Cecily talk to Doreen about her dead sister? Then why would she? Not to mention, this had to be a painful time for her. Dredging up her sister's death wouldn't be a popular idea. Doreen frowned, thinking about it, wondering if Mac would follow through on their recent conversation and ask more questions. Yet he probably couldn't proceed further, his hands tied by the murder-suicide decision made by some clueless higher-up. She guessed he had to live with those nonsensical decisions that probably happened all too often in his job. She was the one who couldn't let it go. Still, she could hardly broach the topic with a dead woman's sister. Could she? Finally, unable to help herself, she loaded mugs in her car and drove back to where she had found the body. Everything was cleaned up, more or less. The carnations were flattened, which just reminded her how she'd missed the government application deadline. She'd been so caught up in all the day-to-day stuff that she'd forgotten all about it. She wandered around the garden, studying the area, when a woman called out from behind her. "Hey, what are you doing here?" Doreen turned and smiled at the approaching woman. She looked vaguely familiar, and then she realized this had to be Cecily, the dead woman's sister. She reached out a hand and said, "Hi, I'm Doreen." The woman frowned at her and didn't shake her hand. Doreen's hand fell to her waist. "I'm sorry. I'm the one who found the woman's body." She rushed forward. "I just wondered if there was anything I could do to help memorialize the location where she died." "It's a huge garden, for Christ's sake. Isn't that enough?" Doreen's back stiffened. This was not the kind of reception she'd expected, nor the tone of voice she'd have predicted. She nodded slowly and said, "Often we see on the media how wreaths, cards, teddy bears, things like that are left for those who were lost." She wouldn't have wanted anything childish, she said, her tone cold, bordering on waspish. She didn't like children, never intended on being a mother. She waved a hand at the garden. "And obviously enough damage has been done to the garden already. I'm so sorry. Apparently you have strong feelings about the issue." Cecily looked at her and snorted. "Ya think?" "I heard her boyfriend who shot her then committed suicide," she offered. "I don't know if that'll help your family find closure or not." "Not likely," the woman said. "She was my sister. She was headstrong and willful. I told her to leave Josh a long time ago. He wasn't like us." Doreen studied the woman in front of her. It was on the tip of her tongue to ask what that meant, but was afraid she wouldn't like the answer. Cecily's anger simmered under the surface. Fine lines spread outward from the corner of her eyes, and her mouth was pinched too tight. Something was going on here that Doreen couldn't quite pinpoint. And now she wanted to assess everything. Another puzzle had reared its head, and she was desperate to sort it out. "I'm sorry for your loss. It's hard to lose a sister." The woman crossed her arms over her chest. "I think it's time you left." Crestfallen, Doreen backed up. "I wanted to find closure myself." "It's not often you come across a dead woman," she whispered. She was probably putting the act on a little too heavily, but she was being honest. Finding Celeste had been rough. That young woman was in her prime, not old buried bones. The feelings were very different, but both required time to process. The woman made a brushing motion, as if to wave her away. Doreen hesitated, not sure how to crack through that tough facade. "Well, I guess I'll go then." She looked at the building behind her. "Is the center really closed?" The woman glared at her. "A friend of mine may be in a position to need its services." At that, the other woman hesitated. "It's closed for the moment," she said. "Our funding has been cut, partly due to my sister's boyfriend, the bastard." Ouch. That hurts, particularly when he was almost part of the family. "Yes," she said with a sniff. "He knew what we were trying to do, and yet, he went behind her back telling everybody how wrong it was." "It's a fairly difficult decision for a lot of people," she said. It's a subject that causes strife all over the world. A woman's body is a woman's body, Cecily said. It's her right to do what she wants. Doreen had no intention of getting into an argument about that one. She didn't think anybody would win it. Besides, to a certain extent, she agreed. Why was he so against it? Who knows, she said. I think an old girlfriend was pregnant with his child and aborted it. Apparently, he was really traumatized by that. So when my sister got pregnant, he just about lost it. In joy or in anger, she asked, almost gratified to hear she'd been right about Celeste. At that, the woman laughed. Isn't that a dilemma? Child support or raising a baby? Well, for many, it would be the baby, Doreen said sympathetically. That's what he wanted. He was desperate to have his own child. Particularly after losing the other one. I can kind of see that, Doreen said. My sister got what she wanted. And in this case, she didn't want him or the baby, Cecily said with a sneer. And he got her for it too. Oh my, so they broke up and he turned around and killed her? She winced at that, thinking about how angry and heartbroken he must have felt. But could Doreen trust Cecily? Or was she spouting off lies that suited her? He must have really cared for her then. That's the theory, Cecily said, turning to walk back up the steps. Most likely he was just concerned about losing something he wasn't ready to lose. Men need to be in control at all times, and they want to be the ones who do the breaking up, she said. Doreen wasn't sure that was always true either. Something was so adamant and defiant about Cecily, as if she was right and the world was wrong, with no room for a middle ground. The woman sneered at Doreen. I guess you didn't get along with him. Cecily shook her head. Nothing to get along with. He was an asshole. Ouch. Most people don't say such strong things about the dead. Most people won't tell the truth. Why shouldn't I tell the world how I feel? It sounds like you hated him so much that you're happy he's dead. Absolutely I am, she said with a laugh. And the way she was acting at the end, the same goes for my sister. What do you mean by that? She took his side, she said. That would never go down well with me. She glared at Doreen from the top step. I've already said too much. Take a hike. And she walked in and closed the door. As Doreen stood with her hands on her hips, almost open-mouthed, she could see the curtains closing Cecily off from the outside. Now that is one angry woman, she muttered to Muggs. Muggs strained at the leash. She walked him to the side of the building, so he could take a bathroom break. She figured the woman would be even more pissed if Doreen let Muggs poop in the garden. But she did have doggy bags to clean up the mess if he had done that. She always cleaned up after him. It was just the polite thing to do. Not everybody was like that, but she was. She waited until he'd done his business, then scooped it up and looked for a garbage can. But there wasn't a public one. There were, however, the garbage cans from the center. She walked over and put the bag in. Inside she saw a whole pile of bloody notes and crumpled cloths below. She glanced up at the center, but the curtains were firmly closed. On instinct alone, she gloved her hands with the doggy bags before she snatched the notes, bagging them up, then took the dog back to the car and drove away. She didn't know what was going on, but she'd seen one thing, bloodstains. And a lot of them. As if someone had used the papers, possibly the cloths, to clean up. But to clean up what? Had Cecily seen her sister in the garden and came out to try to save her, then gone inside when she couldn't? Because maybe Doreen had come? That didn't make any sense. Back home again, she pulled on a pair of gloves, covered her kitchen table with a big plastic garbage bag, and carefully looked at the papers. Crumpled up, they were heavily blood-stained. But whose blood and why? She frowned. Should she contact Mac or not bother him? It was always hard to know what to do with him. If there were fingerprints or the blood belonged to Celeste, how did it get onto the papers and into the garbage? She knew Mac would probably either get angry or frustrated, but she had to do something about this. She called him. "I know it's your Monday, and you really don't want to hear from me again," she said hurriedly. "What is it?" "I went back to where the dead woman was found," she said. "I know you don't want me interfering, and I didn't want to, but I felt compelled to return to the spot and maybe find a way to memorialize the poor woman's death." She sighed. But then the sister came out of the center. She was not friendly. "She's a bit abrasive. She's a very strong-willed, stiff-necked feminist. And she's not shy about letting you know where she stands on issues," he said. "Exactly. We were talking, but at the very end she said that, she was quite delighted her sister's boyfriend was dead, and she was also happy her sister was dead because her sister was converting more toward her boyfriend's beliefs." "What? So now you think her sister might have murdered her?" he scoffed. No. That's not what I'm saying, exactly." She stopped and frowned. "Look. I don't know what I'm saying, but Muggs went to the bathroom. So I cleaned it up, and I took the bag to the garbage. When I put it inside, I saw a bunch of crumpled papers and rags. They were soaked in blood. Cecily had gone into the center and closed the curtains, so I snatched some of the papers out of the garbage and brought them home." She ended in such a big rush, it took him a moment to respond. "You did what?" She groaned out loud. "I don't know why I did that," she said, "but there was a lot of blood, and I mean a lot of blood, as if somebody had cleaned up after murdering Celeste." He sighed quietly. "And I suppose you have those bloodied papers with you now?" "Yeah," she said sadly. "They're sitting on my table. And you want me to come and get them to see if they have anything to do with the case, right?" She winced because he didn't sound very happy with her. And with good reason. It was his day off and he worked enough long hours, and she kept sending him on these wild goose chases. "If you wouldn't mind," she said in a small voice. "If you figure out they have nothing to do with Celeste's death, then I apologize. In the meantime, there is a lot of blood." "Oh, for crying out loud." He went quiet and then said, "Look. I'm not even at home. I'll swing by in about 20 minutes on my way to Mom's. I'll pick it up then. Or at least I'll take a look." She jumped to her feet. "Thank you very much." She hung up the phone. As she stared at the papers, she found a weird list of random scribbled thoughts. It would be nice to have a child. It would be a pain in the ass to have a child. I would love to know what motherhood feels like. I would hate motherhood. She shook her head. Obviously somebody had a very confused mindset when it came to parenthood. She wanted to read through the rest of the pages, but also knew that whenever Mac arrived, she'd lose all of them, so she grabbed her phone and took pictures of each page. She didn't figure there would be any real mystery to the notes themselves. If these were Celeste's, that would make sense. She was obviously confused as to what was happening with her body, and what she really wanted. Maybe she'd had an abortion, then regretted it terribly. But no answers were to be had on that subject, since the woman was no longer available to ask any questions of her. And neither was an autopsy done to get further details. But Mac could at least confirm whose blood this was. When Doreen finished taking her pictures, she put the notes on top of each other again, stuffing them once more into the doggy bag, and moved her phone off to the side so Mac wouldn't get suspicious. She heard his vehicle pulling into her driveway. He came up the porch steps and pounded on her door. Muggs barked like a crazy dog at the front door. She opened it up and glared at Mac. If you knocked like a normal human being, Muggs wouldn't have a heart attack. He knows who you are by now. But when you're angry like this, he's not real happy. Mac stood with his arms crossed over his massive chest. And to make matters worse, Thaddeus looked at him and said, "Damn thing." Damn thing. Mac shoved his face toward Thaddeus and said, "You're a damn thing, Thaddeus." Damn bird. Mac. Don't speak to Thaddeus like that. You'll scare him too. Thaddeus leaned forward, touching Mac's nose with his beak, and said, "You're a damn thing." Astonished, Mac just looked at the bird, giving him the gimlet beady eye, and then he laughed. Tears ran down his cheeks before he finally stopped. He collapsed onto the mega-expensive couch and stared at the menagerie around him. Goliath, not to be outdone, jumped on his lap, making himself at home on his knees. He looked at Doreen helplessly. "What on earth am I going to do with you guys?" "Patience, tolerance, and goodwill would be helpful," she said with a tentative smile. "I know I'm a challenge, and I know you don't want anything to do with me when I get my head into these things, but they're really hard for me to get out of. Let me see what you've got." He scooped up Goliath and held him in his arms as he walked into the kitchen. When he saw the papers, he froze. "You're right. That is a lot of blood." She looked at him. Right, and even more was inside the garbage can. He shook his head. "Did you see anything else?" "Rags," she said, "either cleaning rags or maybe clothing. I don't know what they were." He sighed. She nodded and handed the bagged-up, bloodied notes to him. "I'll go over there to go through the garbage," he said. "But stop doing this, please." "I will." But she held back from promising. She watched as he turned around and left without saying another word.